and welcome to episode 10 of the Elearning Unlocked podcast. I'm Jill Chester, the founder of Little Man Project. We're a bespoke development company that specialises in developing learning experiences for charities and the third sector. This podcast runs alongside our Elearning Unlocked blended learning programme. The programme supports learning and development professionals in charities to design effective e-learning for their staff and volunteers. This is our 10th episode, and boy, 2025 is already running away from us. In this episode, we're really pleased to be joined by a couple of participants from Elearning Unlocked 2024. We're going to be discussing their experiences, but more importantly, how they've applied what they've learned in their role and the difference that it's made. Thank you everyone for being here today. I would love it if we could just go round and do a quick introduction. If I start with Jen, my colleague from Little Man Project, and then we'll go from there.
Hello everyone, I'm Jen from Little Man Project. I have been on the podcast before, but in case you didn't hear those episodes, I lead on the accessibility and quality assurance at Little Man Project. Hello.
Hello, I'm Claire Page. I'm Learning and Development Specialist for Open Doors UK and I, which is a charity that supports persecuted Christians in the hotspots around the world. And it's really a global organisation, but many countries have development bases that are raising funds and awareness, and we have one in the UK and Ireland, which is where I work. I'm responsible for the training and learning of about 100 staff.
Hi, I'm Liam Maguire. I'm the volunteering officer at Christian Aid. So Christian Aid is a charity that is really, I think, best described as a global movement of people and partners and volunteers working together, commissioned by the UK Council of Churches to end the outrage that is extreme poverty around the world. As part of my role, I help deliver our volunteer training to, at the moment, around about 500 volunteers, but with plans to expand that.
Thank you. So just to kind of get some context, you both took part in Elearning Unlocked 2024. Can I just start by asking kind of the why? Why did you attend? What was the driver, maybe for the organisation, but maybe also for you personally?
The driver for the organisation is that we have a learning platform, and although it's sort of been steadily trying to improve its output over the last few years, we needed a bit of an injection of creativity and quality. And for myself personally, it was a way to revisit some kind of qualification around learning and development, but with a specific focus or a way of enhancing that. I took the CIPD level 5 in L&D about 5 years ago. So this was a way of revisiting some of that stuff, but with a different focus.
Yeah, for me, I had quite a clear goal in that we had not long before acquired a learning management system to roll out training to our volunteers. So we had this core of about 500 who required sort of extra levels of training and thought this was the best way to do it. And it very quickly, I realized that when it came to e-learning, like I didn't know what I didn't know. And so the course is just a great way to get like the foundational and like depth of knowledge that I needed.
So in terms of what's changed since, obviously we are now a complete 12 months since you started. Are there any areas that you can kind of pinpoint that I think a practice that's changed as a result, either with e-learning Unlocked, but also just in general? Obviously other things have happened since then in the industry and technology. So anything that you can kind of suggest?
For us, I would say that, the exciting thing for me was that quite a few of my global colleagues also took part in the programme. And so the kind of unity factor in collaboration over what we produce together is probably the main way we've been advanced in what we can do. And we had a meeting just last week about that, really. So that would be the thing. We need to work together. I can't just do this on my own. So it was a huge help to be learning together. And that's what we'll primarily take forward. I think that we've all heard the same information. We've all received the same resources and tools. We've all been speaking the same vocabulary. And now we can build on that.
So good, Claire.
Interesting. We talk actually in the program, don't we, about kind of creating common language and common process. So yeah, no, that's an interesting outcome for you. Liam?
I think probably the biggest changes in my practice have just been around like understanding what it is that we want the learner to get out of their training and to ensure like that is part of the conversation that we're having as we're talking about learning. So not just saying, well, we've delivered some training, sort of tick, but actually to think, well, has that training achieved the goals that we want it to for the learner? And I think that's also something that I've taken into like sort of wider practice as well. So when we're running like an innovation session or something like that, to think, well, what is it that we really want out of this session? And then how can I build all of the elements towards achieving that goal?
I would agree, because I think the pedagogical side of it, which I didn't expect to be a big element, actually has been the most sort of transformative, really. And so being pointed towards Kathy Moore's action mapping and that poster, "Will training help?" I'm continually waving that at people or quoting it. I was yesterday. Might annoy people, but will training help? It was so good. And you both challenged me on objectives and goals and objectives, and in keeping, what's important from the very first. So I'd agree with Liam about that. Basically, that's been so transformative actually in the past year. And I wouldn't have thought, in a way, because I kind of thought I was the queen of objectives, that I would need that correction, but I did. And I've really valued that.
That's really interesting. I'm going to put you both a little bit on the spot here, as is my way. Quite often we hear from charities who say it's actually quite difficult to come up with those objectives because you don't necessarily have SLAs in place, or you might not have, you'd have different budgetary requirements. You can't kind of, maybe talk about sales or, customer. So has that been a challenge, or actually have you found that, you've obviously kind of really taken that concept to heart? Have you found it a challenge to come up with those goals and objectives?
Well, the core sort of wisdom from Kathy Moore is that it's not just knowledge objectives that are important. It's how you change people's actual behaviours, or, what they physically produce. And so actually, if you keep asking the will training help question, you often end up not having any training to do, because you realise you have to take a different approach. Certainly if something's cultural, you won't just do it in a 90-minute session or send people to a bit of e-learning and sort people's attitudes that way. So I think it's really core, and it actually makes you spend less money, not more.
Great tip.
I don't know if that's a good thing.
Round of applause there for every charity. I agree. Why? Just keep on asking.
Yeah, I think I'd probably say something similar. I think sometimes it's easier when the goal is like within your gift to craft. So if it's a standalone session, for example, that's part of like a broader piece of work, then you kind of got the scope to come up with that goal a bit more yourself. I think that when it is wider sort of stakeholders, the approach that I've tried to take is to have a good awareness of like what are the sort of the broad level sort of strategic business objectives that are trying to be achieved, and then how that can get translated into an actionable goal, and then sort of kind of work with people to finesse that into something that we're all happy with.
Excellent. Thank you. So you kind of mentioned some of the things, Liam, that you've been doing as a result. Can you talk us through, kind of how you've implemented this new knowledge?
Yeah, sure. So I think, a couple of things that I've done recently are we put together a 2-hour training session for volunteer managers. That was originally going to be a piece of traditional e-learning that people would just do through an LMS. But actually, as a result of doing the course, I realized that wasn't the best way to deliver it. So we put it together as an interactive workshop. We use online tools like Mural to run our activities, with sort of thought to how we could make it as engaging and interesting as possible. So rather than just doing like a SWOT activity or something like that, to disguise that within a treatment so that it's themed and feels fun and engaging, and almost like, I guess, in those kind of things, my goal is for people to learn without actually realizing that they're learning stuff.
That's good.
And I think I wouldn't have been able to do that without the understanding of like how people actually learn, like the nuts and bolts, the kind of psychology and pedagogy of learning. Just it wouldn't have made that. It would have been much harder to do that.
And what would you have done in the past, do you think, Liam 1.0?
Yeah, I think speaking personally, my default would have been sort of to deliver a presentation on, this is what you need. This is the basics of volunteer management, and just to go through that systematically with a slide deck. And at the end of that, you feel like you've achieved something, and it feels like you've done it effectively because it's maybe a quarter of the time that a workshop would be. But actually, you don't really have any way of knowing whether the people on the call were engaged and whether they've taken away, actionable learning, and more importantly, the things that you want them to take away.
So what was the feedback? How was that received? Not to put you now on the spot again.
No, it's fine. It was really, really well received. So we did a dummy run with a group of willing participants and got some great feedback. And then we launched a version 1 to the wider organization, which we now run on a quarterly basis for quite a small group of about 12. But each time we give a feedback survey at the end, and each time our feedback has been in the 8s and 9s out of 10. So we're really, really happy with how it's landed.
Brilliant.
Well done.
Thank you.
Claire, did you want to?
Certainly. Yes, I was just thinking about a guy called Steve Adam who came and talked to us once and possibly wrote a book about the centre brain and how you speak to it. I think that's quite characteristic of the training that you gave us last year in the e-learning thing, which is that, you've got to appeal to the fun, the story side of people's natures, the emotional, the touchy-feely side, rather than, as Liam was saying there, you could just go for the, nuts and bolts, no frills presentation. But instead of saying it so baldly in a way, the work is to be transformative and to think through the image, the metaphor, the parallel idea, really to work that through. And hopefully, if you're digitally wonderful, obviously you can use articulate storyline and create the most marvelous sort of animated or at least visual version that takes people through it, as you say, Liam, not realizing you're even learning. That is the goal. We don't often reach that, I don't think. And partly of that's to do with my own digital dinosauriness. But with other people, working together, that's what I want to do, really, to impart that joy and that humour into what we do. And I think I'm challenged this year on a different level to train the trainers, because we just mostly have quite a bit of in-house training. And I know that it won't occur to most people who are just getting up to talk about something, or even to create slides and to create an e-learning course on something. They won't think about it from that aspect. They will think about what point by point is the point I need to get across, load of bullet points or whatever. And they won't do that transformative work of almost creating a parable around what you're saying so that people, it gets under the radar, you get the point through. I've seen some of, the work that you've done, courses on, vicarious trauma, things like that. And it's just done so engagingly. It's a joy to look at. You might think, oh, that's a difficult subject. I don't really want to approach this. It's going to be hard. It's going to be boring, whatever people's preconceptions are. And that's obviously what you want to sort of get over that hurdle, really, and bypass the, what's the not centre brain, the marginal brain. I don't know. I'm not talking about right and left, but I'm talking about the emotion centre of a person as opposed to the intellectual, cognitive sort of peripheral apprehension of a person.
Love it. Love it.
Where's that left us?
I think from a personal perspective, ironically, even though I absolutely at the core of me know these things, I think I really can appreciate a trainer's lean towards preaching. Because I think that's, it took me a long time to get over the fact that I feel like I'm giving value for money if I'm giving people as much of my brain as I can. I just kind of want to give as much. And I feel like if we sit around and chat, then that takes away from me giving them expertise. It's a constant reminder to myself. So, I like the idea, Claire, that you're going to engage with your trainers, because I think that so much of the time they're doing it for the right reasons. And it's really about getting them to get past that. And it's a little bit of the unknown, isn't it? When you do a workshop, if you talk, you've got your slides ready, you know what you're going to do. It's all, when you start saying, let's have a discussion, and no one speaks, there's a lot of unknowns in there. And yes, you learn the techniques, and the more you do it, the more you realize it'll be okay at the end. But it's a lot, it is something that trainers need to be supported with to make that change, because they are used to years and years of, delivering expertise.
And people think that presentational part is the most important part of the learning cycle, if indeed they think about there being a cycle.
Yeah.
And it's about a quarter of it, and I think that it's what everyone forgets is the person who's on the receiving end, or the group that's on the receiving end, is what they're bringing, which will look invisible and silent to people at the beginning. And if you don't dig into and find it, then you'll never know how you can interact with that. But actually, that's the exciting, interesting bit, I think. And that, and that's what
Definitely.
you prioritise as well, don't you?
I think they were, even as we moved through Elearning Unlocked last year, even though we knew that was important, because of all the amazing feedback and kind of questions and those conversations between different delegates, I think it made us realise even more how important it was. And I just think some of the stuff that came out of those discussions, and supportive relationships between different charities, that is the bit that really, really excites me. And like hearing what, one charity giving a solution to another charity's problem potentially. So I think even though we know it, I think when you're experiencing like the kind of magic firsthand, it reminds you, actually we need more and more of this, because this is really, really great.
Definitely, we so need that, I think. That's the thing. And I think you think with the e-learning, it's a finished result. I think that's what feels a bit difficult about it. And you were sort of referencing this earlier, Jill, weren't you? When you were talking about, whether the e-learning unlocked becomes locked in, and you can't you can't flex. And it's the same with us, with our learning management systems. It can feel like a very inflexible tool. And then you, like Liam says, you need to lift off with some personal stuff, with some face-to-face stuff, or some, at least, people together online, so that there's some kind of interactivity beyond what you've prepared and set on this platform that people can go to and kind of just download.
I think there's definitely sort of challenges to navigate as well. I mean, I consider myself very fortunate that my manager is very supportive of that kind of thing, and very supportive of exploring new ways of doing things, which I'm really grateful for. I could imagine, though, that one could be part of a charitable setup where, either there's a limited capacity or limited funds, or just a different way of seeing things that makes it feel like we just got to keep creating content, or we just got to keep churning out presentations. And there is a sense in which, on one level, if you've got a presentation that's well set up with good notes, sort of anyone can really pick it up and deliver it without necessarily needing, great presentation skills. I think if you're doing something that's a bit more interactive, I think we've probably all been in bad workshops that can easily turn into presentations by the back door.
Yeah. And particularly more challenging to make that interesting, engaging when everyone's at home and remote. We're doing it in kind of a digital format, as opposed to my favourite sessions 100% to do are the charity learning ones where I'm in the room with everybody. I'd rather do a 120 people workshop than a 30 people workshop online any day. I love that energy and the feedback and the cheekiness and the, and the interaction. And so, I do think that it's easier to do because people now are comfortable in this situation. 5 years ago, getting people to come and learn on, live online, it was, that you were struggling to get people to be heard and volume and speak. And, we're much more comfortable in this zone, but that doesn't mean we haven't got fatigue from it. And yeah, it's interesting, Claire, both of you, I was reflecting on, the kind of arc that we're potentially going through with e-learning. After COVID and lockdown, we had a big rush to create content. We realized that we didn't need to do so much face-to-face training. But I feel like we're now also moving into that idea that we do need face-to-face, even if it is not in person, but it's live online, that we do need to have that social interaction that isn't necessarily just me and my manager having a one-to-one or in a meeting, but actually, with my colleagues in a kind of a learning setting, but doing that live.
I think one of the challenges, though, is still that, and I think obviously we're really lucky within the charity community because there is much more sharing, but historically, sharing of e-learning content, things that spark design and curiosity and creativity, there's a lot of protectionism around that. So potentially it wasn't shared a lot. So then you end up being potentially in this self-fulfilling prophecy where things that you're seeing things that are not inspiring. So then you end up creating things because you think that that is the most creative you can be. And you're kind of in this cycle. But obviously we were in a different situation because there was lots of sharing within the community we're in. And I think what I find interesting from my point of view is because accessibility is a relatively newer area of application, there is a lot of sharing because people aren't as worried that they necessarily know how to do it all correctly. So then there's loads more ideas and that kind of community there. And I think as long as there is that community of sharing, like that's the most important thing, isn't it? To keep having new ideas. So I think the thing I'd love the most is charities sharing their content and ideas and stuff. Like I had a call with Claire a few months ago and she was showing me some of the visual ideas for one of your courses. It was around the trauma one, Claire, and like amazing. Like, I know you just said a minute ago that it isn't as much your comfort zone, but actually all the designs and stuff that you were coming up with were far more progressive than actually some of the things that I've seen within commercial suppliers or commercial e-learning in terms of design. So I think, when you see all those different ideas, it just sparks off your curiosity and you start thinking, oh, right, okay, it doesn't have to be like that. I can push it further. It can be more than that.
Well, I love what you're saying there. Well, not just because you're saying something nice about me, but the whole thing about the community, because I think I've been seeking that and I still haven't found what I'm looking for, so kind of thing. I hope that the charity area can be as willing to share, as you say. It's just finding others and in fact that's what the course does, that you don't find so many other people doing the same job as you really have to search a little bit to find. I think that it's a bit like the music scene. Folk music is much easier kind of scene in which to share and become a part and participate, and not a lot of attitude as you might into a different area of
Pop.
rock or pop or something like that. And I feel like the non-profit sector should absolutely, because it's of its values, make it easy for people to collaborate and share. And I'd love to see that happening more, really.
Agreed.
Yep.
So kind of moving on, what do you think the biggest challenges are that you face within your organisation around creating e-learning? What's holding you back? That was a full stop.
That's
It didn't sound like it. What's holding you back?
It's a great question. I think one of the challenges that we have is because we're working with volunteers is actually just engaging those volunteers in e-learning. We find that we either have those who have never done anything like learning on an LMS before, or they have, but they've had bad experiences. And so you're trying to navigate this space between, on the one hand, saying, I promise you it's not like that anymore. And at the same time, say a group who maybe it's not so much that I think it's just lack maybe the confidence to just sort of dive in and give it a go, or the confidence to know what to do when things don't work. And I think within that as well is a piece around how do you motivate people to learn? Because if you're dealing with employees and it's mandatory training, at the very, very bottom, you always have the lever that you can pull, which is, well, it's part of your job to do it. You can't do that with volunteers.
It's a persuasion job, isn't it? But I think there's persuasion at all levels or in different ways, whether it's because the person, there's no stick with which to beat them, you need a carrot with which to feed them or whatever. I'm not sure I totally agree that, with staff even saying, I mean, we try that, you still got to incentivize and motivate, haven't you, like you're saying? Yeah, but I would say the challenge for me, because I'm internally facing, I am thinking about staff. It's not an external facing audience. We have a load less sort of resource that I can access than everything that we do for external audiences, and that is my biggest frustration, really. So I've been used to working in the other part of the team as well, thinking about external audiences. You get some fantastic design resource and, many more staff. Whereas if it's thrown back to me and I've got to be all things rolled up into one, designing, writing and incentivizing everything, I might be able to manage part of it, but not all of it. So we can't do things without other people, but then we have to persuade them to come on board. So it's a different level of persuasion, but it's still necessary to achieve what you want to.
I don't think I could have set that question up and got two more perfect responses. I do think that there is 100% two ends of the scale that you've just encaptured. And that is, as Liam said, you've got this, how do I motivate people to do the learning? Particularly difficult with volunteers where you don't have any mandatory. So that whole kind of motivation and encouragement. And then at the other end, you've got this real difficulty of how do I create great resources that once I've motivated them, that then is meeting their needs, is visually interesting, is engaging. And, those are two classic problems. Now, I would say they're probably in different ways talked about across the learning development sector. I think we talk about it because, you've got the volunteer thing, but, big corporates talking about big numbers and that they're having equal problems. They've just got bigger numbers. Yeah, that idea that once you get them to the learning, you've got to meet their needs, but it's also got to be visually interesting. Dare I say it, maybe even fun. And, that's a challenge for an in-house team as well to be able to.
I think you're going to motivate them more, though, if they know that they don't have to sit through 10 hours of e-learning. So it's like that happy medium within that continuum. Like if I know, and I'm just thinking from the volunteers within the community hub that I'm a trustee of, they are more motivated when they know the learning is talking to them, means something to them, has all of their objectives and is giving them the information that they need, the minimum amount really to be able to do what they need to do in the shortest amount of time. Because I think
and that is really
we really
important,
struggle with
think,
that.
because I think we could possibly have the wrong model in our heads, really, when we slack stuff onto a learning platform. People know that they can go to YouTube and find some quick animated thing that will, tell you the contents of a book and the action points in 3 minutes or less. And I think our model is, we're so having to pull that back to that. That's what the course gave me as well last year. I think sort of clarity around that. Yeah, I think we've probably got the wrong model. And even though, as you say, it's still relatively new area to be in, it's not that old, but we probably still need to refresh and refine what the model is that we're trying to give people. I mean, the articulate product, Rise 360, which obviously tries to, or the micro-learning version of that, is a good discovery because basically, you're just doing things in quick 10 skeletal points and done, and that's what people probably want, but it's not necessarily what we want to give them and or are able to give them in a good way. So yeah, I think that short and fast and sweet and
I'd
funny.
probably add in there as well, like not always appropriate for all of the needs. And I think it's actually about just recognizing that if you have a variety of different solutions that are available for different needs, then that's going to be a better option, isn't it, all round? Definitely there's some,
And that variety.
and the variety.
A bit of interactive workshop with Liam, a micro learn for, and it's about what is your objective, and then I can match it to the right solution, because rather than just saying I've got a training needs analysis, so we're going to have some training.
And that actually marries really well with kind of, not just the objectives, but also the reality of charity budgets, because ultimately, we can't always have 10 workshops, or we don't have the budget to always create bespoke learning or a video crew to be able to do, very professionally filmed weekly video shoots to do whatever we need to do. It kind of, I think that toolkit of making decisions as and when, as soon as, certainly we're seeing that a lot more, I think, within the last kind of 4 months. Many charities have been coming to us and are actually talking to us from the inception, like, these are all of our different resources, how can we maximize the learning across the board? And we're getting much more involved in all of the reviewing of all of the content rather than individual resources, which has been quite an interesting shift, I would say.
I think it's something like really quite fundamental there, in that there's something about being able to work within the sort of the scope and the confines and the limitations of wherever you find yourself. It's one thing to know what you want to achieve, but if you don't have a clear understanding of whether you have the resources and the time and the capacity and the ability to achieve it, then you're almost setting yourself up to fail from the beginning.
I think that's what I did last year. But I think that, and everybody laughed as they watched me. Yeah, but it's good. I feel I'm clearer. I'm clearer after all that thinking last year and all the input. I know what's out there. I'm much more keenly aware of that. Now I'm very keenly aware of that disconnect, that gap that you're describing, Liam. But I'm armed, I think.
Absolutely, that's me sighing relief, because that, one of you mentioned at the very beginning, you don't know what you don't know, and
No, that's
once
it.
we tell
That's
you what
right.
you don't know,
Yeah.
my greatest fear is that you go away with no answer. So
No,
that
that's
was
not the
definitely
case.
what,
No.
what we were trying to do was say
I know.
there's a lot in here, and we
Yeah.
really, it's really important to know all these things, but you can also hopefully do stuff as well.
I know. I mean, truthfully, if I turned around at the end of the day and realised I couldn't do a single thing that you tried to teach me, but I knew that you or other people might be in a position to
Only
help,
us.
then only you, yeah, of course. I'm still more knowledgeable than coming to you ignorant. And no, it's better than that. Even though I think it is a challenge. It was a challenge to me to produce the content on the basis of what I was being told. I still think it was very worth it.
Good. So in terms of big picture for your organisation, what are your top priorities, whether it's you and your team or you as an organisation, in terms of learning development? What are your priorities for the year?
Well, I would say in our case, our priority for the year is that we are currently working on redesigning all of our mandatory training for volunteers. That's our big priority. So when we rolled out the platform, we had to sort of go with what we had, which was essentially just staff training SCORMs, which were functional, but not ideal for volunteers. So we're in the process now of reworking those so they're much more volunteer friendly in their language, but also sort of centering the volunteer as the learner and looking at, do they really need to know about this?
Yeah.
Probably not. And, cutting things out and just redesigning it.
Sounds great.
Claire?
I think, yes, I'm thinking of a mixture of the things that I want to really prioritise and the things that I know different parts of our organisation want to. And I'd say there's 4 areas. For me, professional practices or core competencies, or whatever you like to call them, which sound very boring, are fundamental. Once you know where you're going with those, that speaks to a lot of different areas, but it's not sexy. And so I would keep that as my priority for this year, even though it's not necessarily the organisations. We will make some waves towards that, but not as much as I'd like in a way. Then I think there's the hard skills, the sort of data strategy area that we're involved in pushing forward, which will either be speaking about knowledge management or AI or, the digital end of basic things like filing. They're important areas to get right, to become agile and more united, really. So that will be part of the content for this year. On the soft skills side, there's the whole diversity, inclusivity, equity and belonging.
Because Trump said you had to dump that now. Is that not
Yeah,
what your
yeah,
plan
well,
is?
let's try telling them that here.
Good.
Yeah, so unconscious bias, sexual harassment guidelines on the new the new law, mental health, people skills, sort of disagreeing well, conflict management, and then leadership and management, having a good leadership model and sort of working to that and training people in that, and through managers too. Those are the areas. There's probably every area. Really
I was going to say, I want to have this call again next
You're
year
gonna
to
be
find out
busy.
how well you did. That's a lot, but that sounds amazing. No, it's great.
Oh, don't. Yeah.
So in terms of your own personal, so we've done big picture organisation, is there anything that, maybe as a result of this or, separate, obviously we talk a little bit about AI and I'll have to talk more about it this year, that what is your personal thinking around how you're going to kind of progress your professional skills?
For myself, the accessibility area was was a really good unit to get into and to think about, going on some neurodivergency training quite soon, and just all the different aspects of that disability awareness. Anyway, those sorts of areas and thinking how we can apply that within e-learning, but much more broadly as well. That's a huge learning curve for me, but it's right on point for us where we are, for our team, our wider team. So that will be part of it. But you, Liam?
I think for me, I would agree with you on the accessibility and inclusion side of things. Like there's still a lot that we can do there to make it more accessible for our volunteers. I think in addition to that, I would say that I think I really want to get to grips with the design tool that we use at Christian Aid so that we can actually sort of start building some interactive training as well. One of the challenges that I have is that within my role, learning and development is a part of it.
Yes.
But I have all these other hats that I wear. And so it's hard to find the time to develop a skill if it's, I almost had to think ahead and think, okay, well, this project is coming up in 2 quarters' time. What skills do I need to develop now so that when that project lands, I'm ready to go? Because once a project gets here, I don't really have the time to develop the skills because there's other things that are going on as well.
Oh, that's a tricky one. Because you don't know what you don't know, as we said, so yeah, interesting. So just as we're coming to an end, I like to ask our guests how you like to learn. I'm always fascinated by the different ways in which we are continually developing every day. So anyone volunteer to go first?
I certainly love a good old-fashioned book. I love books in whatever format. And so that'll be the way I learn at the moment, reading books about, the Learning and Development Handbook that we've talked about before, Michelle Parry-Slater's is good, keeping me on track, and a book about unconscious bias, which we're going to be working through together as a team. I was sort of feeling a bit like, do I want to read this? But actually I was quite engaged very quickly, and particularly I look forward to some discussions around that using material. Another book that people here are keen to read, or some of them are, is The 7 Deadly Sins of Women in Leadership. And
that sounds great.
whether or not you like that as a title, it's an interesting area for us to explore. We have a female CEO, we have good representation of women in leadership here, but there's always people coming up who want to talk about it further. And
Really down.
I should be interested to get into that with others.
Amazing. I've written that down too. Liam.
I absolutely love learning. I don't know whether learning could be a hobby, but it's definitely a passion. So there's always something that I'm on the go. I think probably the way that I really like to learn is two ways. One is I like to learn analytically. So it's not enough for me just to know the what. I have to know the how and the why and the when. I want to break it down and, take the engine out and see how it works and then put it all back together again. The other thing I'd say is I really like to learn like in an interconnected way. So I like to I always have 2 or 3 books on the go at the same time. And I like to try and find things in the other books that apply to their own sort of topics and things like that. And really like to then just talk to people about what they're learning and what they're doing and just sort of learn from them.
Wow, I love that. We need a book club, people. Jen.
It's a really difficult one. I think I change practically on a daily basis, to be honest with you. I love stories. I love learning from listening to people's own personal stories and then going down the rabbit hole of recommendations that they make. I think that's kind of how I got into the neuroscience rabbit hole, because I heard someone talking about their own personal experiences on Radio 4, and they recommended some books and kind of went down that, I think, because it just connects for me in a different way. So yeah, probably that. Just talking though about resources, just a little shout out, and relating to you, Claire, in terms of unconscious bias and human rights and equalities. There is a free resource I just wanted a little plug for everyone to check out. In fact, there's 2 resources which
They're really good.
Organization called 3 has created. They commissioned us to create, and they're actually free online, and we'll put the link to them in the notes. And essentially it's about, as I said, human rights and equalities, but also helping your organization to become a human rights first, bringing that approach into your organization, essentially. So there's loads of different resources in there, and they also recommend other resources. So it's a really good one to check out.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I mean, I would say that if you know nothing about the topic, even if you just do the first section, it completely, we worked really hard to make that really accessible and clear, because I think it's a bit of a minefield of, for the new, it's not when the people who know it understand it, but if you don't, then what's that got to do with equality and diversity? Like how do you? And so that's really, even if you just do that first bit, it really makes it clear, and what I think hopefully you will find the same. Right, thank you for that plug, Jem. And thank you so much for coming on. I knew that it would be an enriching conversation, and it certainly was.
It was great. I enjoyed it.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. And we didn't fight, did we? It's all good. So yes, thank you so much.